what's the most efficient path to victory against this particular opponent.
He's dropping off for the choke here. We could see the finish. It's looking tight. Tight at Alpra.
Hello, and welcome to the Essential Jiu Jitsu podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kwan. The Essential Jiu Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. We're here with episode number 3. Today's topic is Kimuras. So depending on what rank you are, how long you've trained, chances are you've probably heard of the Kimura. We're going to talk about the move, obviously, and a little bit about the history of the man Kimura, who he was. It's a fascinating story, actually. Let's get right into it. So what is the Kimura? The Japanese name for Kimura is ude Garami, which means entangled arm lock. Essentially, it's a figure 4 shoulder lock. It's used as a control and as a submission. It's one of the most common submissions you're going to see in jiu-jitsu, even at the highest level today. Doesn't matter if it's gi or no gi. Characterized by a 2-on-1 grip on an opponent's arm. And essentially, the shoulder's compromised through internal rotation. So usually with a pushing hand on the wrist and a pulling hand of the elbow, these two shearing forces create a very powerful shoulder control and submission. So a term that my professor Rob coined is Ratchet control, where essentially imagine you were going to screw in a screw into a piece of wood. If you were to use a screwdriver to screw in that screw, you would use a lot of energy. Whereas if you had a ratchet device and by way of a lever using a ratchet, you would actually increase your leverage by many times. And this is the idea of the Kimura, right? So when someone's arm is locked at 90 degrees, you can gain this so-called ratchet control and really create powerful braking mechanics on your partner's shoulder. Essentially, if you can get a 2-on-1 on your partner's arm and bring their hand behind their back, you're going to be able to take out even the strongest opponents. So yeah, like I said, it does require generally a 90-degree bend in the arm, although it doesn't need to necessarily be 90 degrees, but ideally the more bent, the better, right? We want to keep a nice strong bend in that arm. Kimura it's an all-purpose tool. I love teaching Kimuras to kids and to beginners as one of the first submission systems they learn, just because if you understand how to use a Kimura control, you can dominate the match and go anywhere with this. We can pass the guard, we can take the back, you can sweep your opponent, you can submit your opponent. So there's so many things that the Kimura does. Doesn't matter if it's gi or no gi. Let's discuss, before we go into the mechanics and the tactics behind the Kimura, let's discuss who invented the Kimura. So this is kind of a cool story. The guy's name is Masahiko Kimura, and he was a judoka from Imperial era Japan. He's considered to be one of the greatest judoka of all time and one of the strongest. And he was born on September 10th, 1917 in Kumamoto, Japan. This guy, he's actually not necessarily a big guy. He's about my height, so he's 5'7", 5'8", and he weighed 185 pounds. So definitely got more muscle on him than I do. He was a 7th Dan in judo and a karate black belt as well. And he began judo when he was 10 years old. There was actually, I read a story that he started judo because one of his teachers was tormenting him. Of course, back in Imperial Japan times, this was kind of pre-World War II. And from what I've heard of the accounts of that tale, the teachers were pretty unfair to the students, physically abusive, and of course, fanatical about the idea of an emperor. And I believe he did not care for his teacher too much, who was abusing him. And he said, hey, one day I'm going to beat this guy. And I believe he did actually hand him a whooping as well. So he began judo at age 10. And at age 15, he was promoted to Yondan, which is the 4th Dan in judo. And at age 18, which would have been 1935, he was the youngest ever he was the youngest 5th degree black belt in judo when he beat 5 consecutive opponents at the Kodokan. And if you don't know what the Kodokan is, it's the headquarters for the main governing body of judo in Japan. So this was kind of a big deal, right? Basically, he's a phenom. He won the All Japan Judo Championship 3 times in a row. He never lost a judo match from 1936 to 1950. So obviously, for over a decade, this guy's undefeated. He's well known, just climbing through the ranks at an amazing pace. He trained 9 hours a day. His training regimen is quite well documented through martial artists through history. He was said to have done thousands of push-ups a day and used trees for uchikomi, which is a pretty common practice nowadays. Maybe not trees, but using walls and pillars and things like that for uchikomi. For those of you who don't know what uchikomi is, it's where judoka practice their entries, right? So getting repetitions, essentially doing entries. And the funny story behind him doing uchikomi on trees is actually because he was asked by his training partners to not use his tukuiwaza, his favorite technique, the osotogari, because he was injuring training partners using osotogari in training, causing concussions and all types of injuries to the partner. If you don't know what osotogari is, it's the outer reaping throw. It's a very powerful move. If you throw someone hard with it, they're basically falling backwards onto their head. And one thing my brother Steve told me was he heard somewhere that one of Kimura's goals in life was to kill someone with osotogari. So you can kind of see that this guy, he came from a different time, but he's a savage. He's very, very aggressive, and he was hurting his training partner. So they said, "Hey, can you please not use osotogari on me for my own, for some mercy on me?" And so he started doing lots of uchikomi on trees, training 9 hours a day, just training like a beast, right? We'll fast forward to 1951, where, of course, Kimura had a very famous match with the founder of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Helio Gracie. Kimura was basically invited to a Gracie Rules, which is essentially a submission-only match in Brazil in 1951. This, normally in judo, when you throw someone, the match ends. In this match, however, this Gracie Rule match, the only way to win was by submission, or I guess unconsciousness, right? And very famously, Kimura broke Gracie's arm with the Kimura shoulder hold, known as the Udi Garami, right? The entangled shoulder lock, or some people called it the reverse shoulder knot. And Gracie's team threw in the towel. And it's actually documented later. Gracie was said to have passed out multiple times in this match from getting thrown around and actually, I believe, getting strangled on the floor. But he came to and woke up and was essentially in a Kimura, and his arm broke. So, it just goes to show you the strength and the ability of Kimura. Now, when Kimura returned to Japan, he actually got in some trouble from the Kodokan because he had actually awarded some judo promotions in Brazil. He had given some dans without the permission of the Japanese Kodokan headquarters, and they basically froze his promotions at the 7th degree dan from age 30 until he died. And, his life kind of goes on an interesting spiral after this event. After this fallout with the Kodokan, Kimura became a professional wrestler, kind of like WWF. Professional wrestling, very big in Japan. And some biographers have said that the reason he did this was to pay for some medical bills because his wife had just been diagnosed with tuberculosis. So kind of a sad story there, but maybe he was just trying to scrape some money together. There is an interesting story. I will link it in the show notes. The myth of Kimura versus Rikidozan. And basically, Rikidozan was a very famous Japanese pro wrestler, if I'm not mistaken, and he invited Kimura to be his tag team champion, and also they were going to compete against each other. And apparently it turned into a shoot fight. And for those of you who don't listen to pro wrestling, what a shoot fight is where partway during the match, it's kind of unscripted, and one of the pro wrestlers attacks the other wrestler. And Ricky Dozan is said to have struck Kimura in the neck so hard that he passed out, and he basically beat the hell out of him while he was asleep, and it wasn't supposed to happen. And Kimura was this was a fight that was for the professional wrestling heavyweight title. It was supposed to result in a draw, but after Kimura was knocked out cold due to these strikes to the neck that weren't supposed to happen, he lost the match. He never received a rematch, and so it's pretty well documented that Kimura never really forgave Ricky Dozan for this treacherous move. There was a attack on December 8th in a Tokyo nightclub. I believe this was in the 60s. Don't have the exact year, but in a Tokyo nightclub, Ricky Dozan was attacked and stabbed with a knife that was soaked in urine, which is pretty crazy, by a dude named Katsushi Murata. I'm going to butcher this, from the Sumiyashi Ika, which is essentially the Yakuza. He was a gangster. And a week later, Ricky Dozan died from an infection from the stab wound because the blade was tainted. And it is speculated, but never proven, that Masahiko Kimura was behind this attack. So we don't know for sure. A lot of people suspect it, but it was never proven. And then Kimura, who was a lifelong smoker, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, I believe, at age 70, and died at age 75 on April 18th, 1993 in Tokyo after his long battle with lung cancer. So that is a backstory behind the legend of the man Masahiko Kimura. And it's a good one. It's well known, it's well documented. Of course, this guy being a lifelong martial artist, obviously a legend in judo, and a guy who fought and defeated Helio Gracie, the founder of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. It's a very interesting story, and it's one that definitely should be sort of passed down throughout the ages. I really like this story, and we don't really know what kind of a guy he was. I know people who say, they don't want to believe that he was behind the death of Ricky Dozan, but my brother has said, there's stories that, he would talk about beating dogs as a kid and torturing animals, and given the era that he was from, and the fact that that Japan was so fanatical at this time, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised either way, I should say. I have no actual opinion, but I just love the legend of him, and I admire the training practices that he always wanted more for himself. He always wanted to train harder and be the strongest one, and do more reps and work harder. So I think that's something we can all kind of appreciate and look up to for sure. Plus, the Kimura, is one of the most effective moves, in my opinion. It's like I've already spoken about how awesome I think it is, right? All right. So now that we've gone over that brief history, let's start discussing some tactics and some mechanical things that can hopefully can help your Kimura and can tune up your Kimura attack. So one thing that I really like about Kimuras is the fact that you can combine them with multiple submission systems. So Kimuras go excellent with arm bars. If you have a Juji Gatame, a cross shoulder lock, basically just a classic arm bar, when you're on top of your partner, you can use a Kimura control to prevent escapes, like the hitchhiker escape. Is just such a strong control because they can't easily spin out because the structure of their shoulder is compromised with internal rotation. So anytime you get an armbar and you can use a Kimura to strengthen that armbar, I think it's highly recommended. Kimuras can be used to get to all different types of triangles, which is really awesome. We see this even at the highest levels, right? We can do this from, especially rear mount and entering into Ushiro Senkakus, as well as just standard front triangles. You could use a Kimura to get to these positions. You could use a Kimura, a triangle, and an armbar all together. So you're using not just 2 submission systems, but 3 submission systems, which really creates a strong dilemma for your partner. And then to top it all off, if you have that position, a lot of the time a wrist lock will be available too, because often if you get to a Kimura triangle, there will be a wedge behind your partner's elbow, and a wrist lock is almost always available. So it's just, again, like a triple or a quadruple threat. So I love using Kimuras with other submission systems. Aside from submission systems, the other half of the coin of the Kimura is the positional advances you can make. So it's not just a submission, it's very well used to control your partners and to navigate to different positions. So for example, if someone shoots in on a single leg on you and you can cover their head, sort of drape your body over their back and their head, you can lock up a Kimura. And often you can use this to hit a sumi gaeshi counter takedown, and you will end up in a position called the T-Kimura most of the time. We'll talk about that later. Of course, there are going to be other times where you could enter sumi gaeshi. So maybe you're on the bottom half guard and you lock up a Kimura, and then you insert your outside hook. And now the outside hook becomes an elevation hook or an action hook, as Gordon calls it, and your other leg becomes a base leg. So one leg used for sweeping, one leg used for driving base and generating force. And so, you can use it for lots of sumi gaeshis, whether from standing or from the bottom position. A lot of people will use Kimuras as a guard pass. So if you're standing over a seated opponent, you can kind of do like this somersault roll through Kimura guard pass, which is very, very common and also effective. And you can, of course, take the back with the Kimura. A lot of the times, if you hammer on a Kimura control, because it immobilizes your partner's shoulder in such a way, you can usually spin your body around to the back, or you can kind of flip them over and take their back from different positions. So again, navigating to different positions with the Kimura. So now I'd like to discuss, now that we've talked about, position versus submission with Kimuras, let's just talk about some key concepts that go along with Kimuras, okay? Some of these concepts I've learned in the last couple of years, and it's made huge advances in my Kimura game, okay? So, of course, we discussed position versus submission, always the dilemma of playing both of these ideas together, right? And when am I going to use a positional advance, or when am I going to use a submission advance? Well, if I have a Kimura on my partner and their hand is in front of their body, generally I'm going to look to advance my position. If my partner's hand is behind their body, that's a good chance that I should look for a submission, right? If you can ever get your partner's hand behind their back, look for a submission. That's a good indicator. So this detail that I'm about to discuss is probably one of the most useful details I've ever seen for the Kimura, and I'm shocked how many people locally anyways that I train with don't know about it. And so I always show it to people, and I always get great, wows around the room. And that's the elbow lever. And if, by the way, guys, like a lot of these mechanical concepts are Danaher's. Okay, guys, a master of mechanics. I'm going to, pump his tires a little bit here, as I will throughout the podcasts. Any episode I do, I love Danaher's stuff. Of course, he's a legend coach, right? And this concept of the elbow lever is one of the most important aspects to Kimura control. So I think it's the most efficient way to do a Kimura. And it just really works against much larger, stronger opponents. So basically what you're doing, if you're watching, I can kind of show you, you have the Kimura, and from the Kimura position, instead of keeping the figure 4 position, you kind of just point your thumb up and straighten your arm. And this straightening of the arm really works to put a wedge under your partner's elbow and internally rotates the shoulder. If you've never done it before, give it a try, because I've always thought before I learned this detail that you need to keep your hands locked in a figure 4 position. And you actually sacrifice the figure 4 position in order to have straight arms, but your wrist is still a wedge that locks over your own wrist. So you're not grabbing your own wrist, you're turning your thumb up and just locking your arms straight. And you'll find this, at least I find this much more efficient than a figure 4 grip, because generally a figure 4 grip involves a rolling of the wrists, which taxes your forearms, okay? Whereas if you use the elbow lever, there is no taxing of the forearm because your arm is locked out as a straight line. So you're just relying on the structure of the skeleton as opposed to the muscles in your forearms. And long story short, you can hold this position for long periods of time. Very cool detail. I love the elbow lever concept, okay? Okay, next question that's pretty logical is Kimura grip, thumbs or no thumbs? This is sort of an age-old debate, and you will see black belts at the highest level using thumbs when they lock the Kimura. Generally, what I use thumb grips for is if I am trapping someone's wrist in like a one-on-one situation. So I just need to like grab someone's wrist and pin it to the floor. I'll use one hand with the thumb. But if I lock up a figure four and I get a Kimura grip on my partner, generally I remove the thumbs and I do what's known as a monkey grip. Now, why wouldn't I use thumbs? Because I find when I get a Kimura control, I like to roll my wrists forward almost like I'm revving a motorcycle. And this does two things. The first thing it does is it prevents your partner from straightening their arm, which is, we're going to talk about common mistakes in the Kimura, but that's like one of the biggest no-nos. We don't want our partner to ever straighten their arm. So if you can if you can roll your wrist forward, and again, for those who are watching, you have the luxury of seeing my beautiful face and my hand gestures. If you imagine, your partner's trying to punch their arm straight. If you're not rolling your wrists, they're just punching straight through your fingertips. Whereas if you're rolling your hand forward, now they're trying to punch through your entire palm in your hand. And so it creates a stronger wedge around your partner's arm. So it's harder for them to extend their arm fully straight and take away the ratchet control of the Kimura. Another thing it does is it just generates way more internal rotation inside the targeted shoulder. So rolling the wrists and using this monkey grip is, I think, the strongest and most efficient way to use the Kimura in the figure four position, right? I already said the elbow lever, I think, is more efficient. So yeah, pinning the wrist, I like to use a C grip. And once the figure four is locked in, I take the thumbs out and I use a monkey grip. Okay, here's another absolute gem from John Danaher. Okay, the idea of the power line. So this concept is amazing. This is basically like, it's just describing where you want to position your body to make the Kimura control the strongest for the finish. Okay, so we're talking submissions now. And Danaher talks about the power angle from the top position or the bottom position. So if you're applying a Kimura from the top, let's say a standard side control Kimura, right, or side Kimura, he discusses how the power line is located diagonally from your partner's shoulder to your hip. So imagine you have a Kimura on your partner's far arm. You want your hip to line up next to their neck, essentially, and you're going to step over their head. And I'll discuss why we're stepping over the head in a sec. You want to step over the head and then bring your head down to their opposite hip so that your spine lines up in a diagonal line to your partner. It's very important to step over your partner's head so that they don't sit up and cause a roll through. So we'll talk about common mistakes next, but that's basically the idea. Keeping your partner's head is keeping your partner's head covered is very important for a Kimura so they can't generate height, right? So this power line from the top is a diagonal line where you place your spine essentially from your partner's near shoulder to far hip, okay? And when Danaher talks about finishing, he even emphasizes, don't necessarily think about pulling the arm, think about moving your head to the far hip so that your spine creates that power angle. From the bottom position, so a common situation that this might be would be like a hantai senkaku. So if for those of you who aren't as nerdy as me and you don't know the Japanese terms, senkaku is a triangle. Hantai senkaku describes a triangle where your partner defends by bringing their arm to the wrong side, like they're hiding their arm behind your leg, right? Normally in a triangle, you want to pull the arm. Well, I'm not even going to say normally you want to pull the arm across the center line because you actually don't need to, but generally you want the arm pointing in the classic direction. And you all know what I'm talking about if you know what a triangle is, right? In this case, a pretty decent defense. You know, I would say it's decent. It's not great. Your opponent decides to hide their arm on the opposite hip. So they're kind of controlling your hip with their arm and burying their arm on the wrong side so that you cannot pull the arm across the center line. And in this case, we could hit a Hantai Senkaku, a wrong-sided triangle. And again, I could probably do a whole series on triangles, but I'll definitely do an episode on triangles in the future. But at this time, instead of going for the Hantai Senkaku, you essentially use your triangle and gain a Kimura control over your partner's arm as they're hiding it. Because as they hide it on the wrong side, they expose themselves to Kimura, right? And so the power line from the bottom position is where you line your head up with their elbow and their shoulder line. So you should move your head to line up completely with their two shoulders so that you're almost perpendicular to them, but their elbow is on that same line, right? So if you can do this, then you're going to have the most efficient Kimura breaks from the bottom as well. And these power line concepts are very, very important because, you know, it's a shame when you lock up a Kimura control and you try and do it on your partner when you're completely perpendicular to them. And then all of a sudden they start sitting up and you're cranking away on the arm and you're not getting the finish you want. And then maybe they roll you through and you lose the position, right? So this power angle really helps you sort of get your body into the right position to finish the hold. Very, very cool. So let's talk about these common mistakes, right? First common mistake, partner straightens their arm. If partner straightens their arm, there's no ratchet control anymore. So we need to keep our partner's arm bent at a 90 degrees so that we can keep accessing their forearm as the lever to their their elbow being the long end of the lever and the shoulder being the short end of the lever. And the forearm is the lever which allows us to do it. If the partner can slip their elbow inside your elbow, so if you lose control of their elbow, then that's also going to be, that's going to mean that you're going to lose the Kimura as well. As far as finishing mechanics are concerned, let's say you're just doing a classic side Kimura, a really great detail is if you can see space between your wrists and your partner's wrists, there's like you have the figure four locked and then there's a space, there's a gap in here, that can be a huge problem as well. So you want to close that gap. And the way you would do that is you would want to actually slide your elbow out. Danaher calls it sweeping your elbow outward towards your partner's elbow. So in doing this, you really access the end of the lever to the shoulder, which is the elbow. So when you're finishing a Kimura, you're trying to make your elbow touch your partner's elbow, essentially. And what this will do is it will allow you to pull on your partner's elbow rather than pulling up through their armpit. So I know this is kind of like maybe hard to visualize over audio, but just get the Danaher Kimura instructional. Do yourself a favor and make your Kimuras really, really good. By the way, if you guys hear coughing in the background, it's my son. He's sick right now, and I'm recording late in the evening, so if you hear coughs, I do apologize. And then the last problem we talked about, our partner's head rising. If our partner's head can rise, then we get the roll-through problem. Now, one thing to note is if your partner does sit up and you get rolled through, if you can keep their hand behind their back and keep that Kimura control hammered on, usually you can re-roll your partner through again and get the break, okay? We saw that when Frank Mir fought Minotauro Nogueira years ago at the UFC and absolutely destroyed his arm. So it's not the end of the world if you roll your partner through, or if you do get rolled through, but in an ideal world, that's not happening. We're stepping over the head and we're finishing every time. Another thing about finishing on the power angle from the top is you're going to be in such a good base that it's so hard for your partner to move from there because they're completely flattened out, right? All right. So, I mean, I'd like to go over a couple of different positions here, some key Kimura positions, and just talk about them, right? I guess I didn't do a section on finishing mechanics because we've kind of been touching on things here and there. But like I said, one thing to remember is I recommend, and I recommend it because Dana recommends it, okay? I'm not a Kimura master or whatever. I'm a lot of this is me taking knowledge that I've learned and just relaying it to you guys. Okay, so I didn't invent any of this stuff, but Danaher favors pulling Kimuras over pushing Kimuras. So consider a side Kimura where you're just pulling up on your partner's elbow to get the finish versus a pushing Kimura, like a dorsal Kimura, which we're going to talk about, or maybe you'd think about it as a strongman Kimura when you're sitting on your partner's head, you pull their arm up and rip it behind their back. That's more of a pushing Kimura. You're pushing their wrist behind their back, whereas Danaher's side Kimura, the wrist is just immobilized, pinned to the floor, and then we're just lifting at the elbow for the finish. So I always try to emphasize fixing my partner's wrist to the floor. Usually I'm putting all my weight on that wrist and gaining the finish through a pulling mechanism rather than a pushing mechanism. Much more efficient, and you maintain your base. So key positions, dorsal Kimura. Once you enter the dorsal Kimura, I mean, you can go to the side Kimura. You can convert that to a side Kimura, which is John Danaher's recommendation. Again, just for the reasons I talked about, because it's more efficient, because you have more base. You could enter a Yoko Senkaku if you step into your partner's armpit. So a Yoko Senkaku is a side triangle. Okay. One of my old coaches, Mike Lee, he actually helped me start On Guard Jiu Jitsu. He helped me open my business. He's a black belt in judo and in jiu-jitsu. He's a really good friend of mine and one of my coaches. He actually used to call this position the Chinese buffet. I'm part Chinese, as maybe some of you know, and he's full Chinese. And he would call that the Chinese buffet just because there's so many moves from the Yoko Senkaku. There's the triangle itself. There's the Kimura. You can always come back up into the Kimura. There's the wrist lock. Kimura on the, or should I say a shoulder lock on the far arm. There's so many different moves from there. So that he used to always call the Yoko Senkaku the Chinese buffet. And then there's another move you can enter from the dorsal Kimura called the Tarikoplata, named after one Tarik Hopstock, who we will talk about the Tarikoplata in a second here. Or Danaher just basically calls that the legs Kimura. So we'll talk about that in a sec. Let's talk about another Kimura position that's really, really important, and that's the T-Kimura. So T-Kimura is, if you did like a rolling Kimura guard pass and you ended up behind your partner, basically anytime you pass your partner's guard and you roll through, you're going to end up in a T-Kimura. And there's kind of two methods to navigate from the T-Kimura position. Imagine a crucifix, but you don't have control of the far arm yet, right? So the first method would be to trap the far arm. That is generally my opening play. I really like to trap the far arm because then I know that I have opposite corners of my partner's body controlled. However, there is another method you can use, and that is the insertion of your knee underneath your partner. So either you're going to insert your knee underneath your partner, usually creating like a knee-elbow connection, and then the other option would be trapping the far arm. So if if your partner decides to turn and come up into you, if you can use that elbow lever from the T-Kimura, you can return them right back to the floor, and often you can slide your bottom knee underneath them when they sit up and take their back. You can also enter the crucifix, like I discussed, by trapping their far arm with your leg, or by inserting your knee underneath. Not only can you take the back, but you can hit an Ushiro Senkaku, a rear triangle. So a lot of the time when you enter Ushiro Senkaku, you're going to do it through Kimura control because it's so, so powerful. So I'll just say this, like the Kimura control, just make sure anytime you're applying Kimura, it doesn't matter if it's from a T-Kimura, a dorsal Kimura, the bottom Kimura, the side Kimura, doesn't matter what position, you have to make sure that your critical control points are engaged. What are critical control points? It's actually a term that I stole from the culinary arts. As you know, I was a chef before. Critical control points are originally what I learned it. It's a term to describe temperatures in food. Okay, you want to keep food at certain temperatures and to prevent pathogens and foodborne illnesses. So I use critical control points as a term to describe systems in jiu-jitsu, control systems. So if I'm going to use a Kimura on you, I know I need to have ratchet control. I know I need to bend your arm at 90 degrees. I know I need to have my wrist rolled ideally, and I need that internal rotation of the shoulder. Even if you have a Kimura control on your partner, you'll see this common mistake from beginners where they're in a T-Kimura position, and instead of extending their arms straight, they're pulling their elbows in tight as they have the Kimura. And the result is the partner slips the elbow inside and they get right out, right? Why does my Kimura suck? Because you're not actually breaking the alignment of the shoulder. You're just holding your arms in a figure 4 position. So rather, instead of pulling your elbows tight to your body as you apply the Kimura, you actually want to extend your arms straight. And that's where the elbow lever comes from. So anytime you're using the Kimura, whether it's to finish or to spin around your partner and take their back, doesn't matter. Always consider, do I have my partner's shoulder compromised? Is the shoulder internally rotated? There comes a certain point where you apply enough internal rotation in your shoulder, it will completely lock out and they will not be able to escape the position. The more that you let their shoulder become less controlled, the higher the chances are that they'll be able to slip the elbow, straighten their arm, and escape the position. Okay? So that's the T-Kimura. Very, very important position to take the back, and you're going to end up there a lot when you're passing the guard. Okay, so we discussed the side Kimura. We discussed the power angle. Okay, I recommend the side Kimura. Whenever you can get there, try and get there. It's one of the strongest finishing positions for the reason I explained, because it's a pulling-based Kimura as opposed to a pushing Kimura. We're creating a pull with an elbow, our elbow touching our partner's elbow, as opposed to pushing our partner's hand behind their back. So it's very, very efficient. And when I'm in this position, I really like to fix my partner's hand to the floor, putting all my weight on my hands. This is so important. I'm immobilizing my partner's wrist and I'm gaining base. That's where I'm planting myself so that I can move my body around. I can put all my weight with my body and my 2 hands on my partner's wrist and move around them to the power angle and finish in a very efficient, very powerful way. All right, let's talk about another position, the head and arm Kimura. The head and arm Kimura is sometimes known as the gift wrap position. Essentially, you have a Kimura control, but your partner's head is inside the grip. And this is a really common situation that happens from mount. If you can get your partner's arm across their center line, usually in mount, it's kind of like mount is essentially closed guard, but just in positions inverted. And a lot of the time in no-gi, the goals remain the same. I either want to bring my partner's arms away from their body, or I want to bring my partner's elbow across the center line. And you can usually do that by threatening a Americana lock from the mount. And then as your partner turns to defend the Americana, you can gain control of their partner's wrist behind your partner's wrist behind their head and apply this so-called head and arm Kimura. It's a great way to take the back. You can use it to do like a chair sit, take your partner's back. And once you get to that position, this sort of, you'll get to like a seated head and arm position. And Danaher and Gordon both discuss this a lot through multiple instructionals. The seated head and arm position is so valuable because of the Kimura control on your partner and the grip that you have, you can kind of transition your legs into different positions. So if you have, you can move your legs to different types of arm bars and different types of triangles from this position, because the Kimura will allow you to move your legs as they are unweighted. Okay. Whereas like a normal Juji Gatame without a Kimura, you're kind of relying on the wedges of your legs over your partner's head and shoulders. In this case, we can move our legs around and we don't really need these wedges because we have such a good, strong internal rotation of our partner's shoulder. So it just goes to show, if you can put someone's shoulder in a compromised position, you can move your body in many different positions. Okay. Next, we'll go back to that Tarikoplata. So this sort of, he's actually a pretty young guy, I believe. He's a Norwegian BJJ black belt named Tariq Hopstock. And he invented this sort of legs Kimura position from the dorsal Kimura position. I mean, I'm sure you can get it from other places. Usually I look for the Tarikoplata when I'm in the dorsal Kimura and I find my partner so strong, I just can't bring their hand behind their back. But instead of transitioning to like a Jujigatame or a Yoko Senkaku, I can transition to Tarikoplata. So you actually throw your leg over your partner's wrist, which is still in front of their body, and then you lace your Kimura arm through and cup your own leg. And then from here, you actually just take your hips off of your partner's body, so that you're basically maneuvering your body weight off of your partner's body, and in doing so, creating a devastating Kimura lock. And sometimes this happens with your partner's wrist still locked, their hands still locked, and you can still finish them. It's quite a powerful move. Again, all these moves are on the John Danaher's Enter the Kimura system. What are you doing? You should get that instructional. Okay, now we'll talk about Monoplata. Monoplata actually is one of my favorite submissions for sure. I don't know if you want to classify this as a Kimura or maybe an omoplata, but I usually hit the Monoplata from the omoplata position, right? So you go for your omoplata, sort of get on top in this, I don't know what you would call it, omoplata straddle position from mount. And then from here, your partner's wrist is essentially wedged in between your hip and in between your body and your leg. And then from here, just like the Tarikoplata, you basically post your hand on the floor for base and take your hips off of your partner, creating a really strong variation of, I don't know if you want to call omoplata or a Kimura. Either way, it's very, very strong. And you, just like the Tarikoplata, it's powerful because your body weight is used to finish the move. Your follow through is done through your hips moving off of your partner. So it's very efficient, very, very powerful. Okay, I just wanted to talk about one last position with the Kimura. This move is easily one of my favorites, and you don't see it that much, but I get people with it in the gym all the time. It's one of my favorite attacks, especially from the guard. You always see the Meow Brothers posting about this move. It's the Barataplata. This move was invented by a Gracie Baja black belt, Rafael Barata Fritas. And he's a smaller guy, but he invented this Barataplata, right? Usually I get it from a triangle that failed. Okay, so maybe I have a triangle on my partner, and then they give you the response where they take their hand that's dangling in front of them and they tuck it back in between their legs. Now you'll notice when they do this, there's always a gap behind their elbow. And this is a perfect time. If you see this is a perfect time because you can't access the wrist, but their elbow is still inside your legs. There's a perfect time to lace your outside arm through and grab your own leg. So from here, what you need to do is transition your leg over your partner's head to the other side, similar to almost like your partner's going around your legs and passing your guard. But because your hand is laced through like an iron bar and grabbing your own leg, it does involve like a couple of inches of your hips switching to the side. But once you get that, they cannot easily pull their arm out, and it's very easy to finish. You just hook their far leg or their far arm and create an angle and sort of chop down on their shoulder. So I love the Barataplata. It's a very deceptive move. I also do get it sometimes from like a top side darce position. So if you're going for a darce and you're lacing your arm under the neck, you can actually take it away from their neck and just thread it through their bicep and then throw your leg over their head and grab your own leg. It's, if you don't know the Barataplata, definitely invest in this move. It is extreme. It comes in handy so much, especially when triangles fail. Right? So as you guys can see right now, so much diversity in the Kimura system. We've talked about different positions. We've talked about like individual Kimura positions. We've talked about common mistakes. We've talked about really key concepts and finishing mechanics. We've talked about positional advances versus submission systems. I mean, it really is the all-purpose jiu-jitsu move. And if you teach a beginner a good Kimura attack, it will serve them all the way through their entire jiu-jitsu journey. And I really think of those concepts that I talked about today. The hand position rule. Where's their hand? If it's in front of their body, behind their body, are we going to attack a positional advance or a submission? The elbow lever is crucial. to have thumbs or not to have thumbs, getting onto the power line when finishing the submission. These are all very, very important rules. And now that's pretty much all I got for Kimuras, and also obviously we went to that history lesson, which I thought was very interesting. So let's now switch topics and just have a quick thought. This was a suggestion that we got from actually one of my students' girlfriends. And she said, "Hey, Matt, you should talk about dating a jiu-jitsu athlete." And I thought that's a pretty cool idea. Could probably do an episode about that in itself, but we can talk about, the benefits and the downsides of dating a jiu-jitsu athlete. I'm sure there's a lot of girls out there who, well, let's be honest, they're probably not listening to the show, but I'm sure there are a lot of girls out there who are dating jiu-jitsu athletes and they can relate to this very much. My wife was one of those people. And the reason, a lot of the cliche is that the girlfriend is upset that the boyfriend is always training, right? No, you have all this time for training. You don't have time for me. And that is true for sure. It's a cliche for a reason. And the way that I got around that was I just said, "But honey, I'm going to have a gym one day. This is going to be my career. So you can't really say anything, right?" And she's like, "Yeah, you're right." So my recommendation with you guys, if you're that obsessed with jiu-jitsu and you love doing jiu-jitsu, try to make it a career, because then you'll always have a reason to go to training every day, right? So benefits of obviously dating a jiu-jitsu athlete. I mean, it's just a healthy sport. Aside from the inevitable injuries you will receive, it's a healthy activity. People who do jiu-jitsu generally are in pretty good shape, at least if they're serious about it. It's an excellent form of exercise. It's good for the mind, the body, the soul. Like I said, except for injuries, it will add focus and passion to someone's life. So if you're dating someone who trains like 4 times a week, 5 times a week, they have a place to put their focus and their passion. And, they're going in there and burning up tons of energy and getting their aggression out, and also learning a lot about respect. That's another cliche. And sometimes as a gym owner, we use that cliche to use as marketing for kids and getting kids in the program, but it's totally true. And when you train jiu-jitsu, you gain respect for everyone, because you realize how useless you could actually be in a fight, right? And you realize how dangerous a fight is and how much you actually want to avoid fighting. And so, that kind of goes along with it. You come back with this new respect for people. And and you can always sort of, whenever I go out, I'm always looking around and sizing people up in my mind, thinking tactically, like, okay, what if that person were to attack me, right? So there's a security, a sense of security that comes along with dating a jiu-jitsu athlete. If I was a woman, I would want to date someone who knows how to handle their business if they need to, and can take care of themselves and take care of me if needed. Even though, they're not, let's not beat around the bush. Jiu-jitsu is it's not going to work against multiple attackers with weapons, right? But it is, it's a good form of fighting. If it's one-on-one and you're going against someone untrained, the jiu-jitsu guy is going to win every time. And unless there is some unknown factor, it is an extremely effective martial art. And I guarantee you will be safer dating a jiu-jitsu fighter than an untrained person. So what are the downsides of dating a jiu-jitsu fighter? Obviously, we discussed the potential, let's be honest, inevitable injuries that do go along, little things here and there. Hopefully nothing too catastrophic, but disasters do happen. You're going to need, if you're dating a jiu-jitsu athlete, you're definitely going to need a high level of support and understanding. And this is required for their training, for competitions. You're going to have to listen to them talk about it all the time. If they compete, they're going to they might want you to come to their tournaments and spend long days sitting there and just being like, what am I watching? These two dudes dry humping each other, right? But to us is the greatest thing in the world. So it's kind of funny. Jiu-jitsu athletes get very obsessed with jiu-jitsu. And it's kind of common knowledge in the jiu-jitsu world that if you find a girl you really like and she kind of gives you the ultimatum, it's either me or it's jiu-jitsu. It's like, well, the classic answer is I'll miss her, So make sure that, if you love jiu-jitsu, that you commit to someone who understands how much you love it, how much it means for you, and how it is, how beneficial it is for you in many ways, right? Like you will be submersed in jiu-jitsu culture if you date someone who's obsessed with jiu-jitsu, and there's just nothing really you can do about it, right? They're going to have laundry happening all the time. It's like my place. I got gis hanging up everywhere because I train every day. You go through tons of laundry, potentially multiple washing machines over the years. Wanting to go on expensive vacations to go do tournaments that you don't win any money. You just want to go on a trip and go to compete. It's like, why would you do this? Why would you pay money to potentially injure yourself? It's like, are we going to get to go on a vacation? Well, I mean, I'm going to go do a tournament and I'm going to go watch the boys, but you can go shopping. Like it is really kind of silly when you think about it, but it's hard to explain when something like jiu-jitsu, when you get passionate about something, it does become an obsession for a lot of people. And it takes a really understanding person, a really understanding partner to accept that and to support that. But if you can find someone who supports that, and, if you have aspirations of having a career in jiu-jitsu and your partner fully supports that and they know how much it means to you, man, cling to that person, because it is a very, very special thing. And I even recommend for couples to train together if possible. Personally, for me, I think everyone should do jiu-jitsu. I think the world would be a better place if we all did jiu-jitsu. But especially women, just because jiu-jitsu is kind of the anti-sexual assault martial art. If you're a woman, if you get attacked, you find yourself on your back. You find yourself in a position where you're underneath someone and you don't know what to do. It's good to know how to move your body. It's good to know how to finish someone from your back, incapacitate them, apply, a joint lock, whatever you got to do to survive. And I think everyone, especially women and children, need to learn how to do jiu-jitsu. And I think the world would be a safer and a more respectful place if they did. So couples that train together tend to stay together. And I think it's cool if couples can share that together. All right. Let's talk about one new thing I learned this week. So I did compete in Grappling Industries on the weekend. They came to Vancouver for the first time. Of course, I live in Port Coquitlam, BC, which is a suburb of right outside of Vancouver. And they came to BCIT, which is the British Columbia Institute of Technology, and did their first ever event there. I did 3 divisions. I had 9 matches. I won triple gold. It was my first time I've competed since knee surgery. I had my meniscus repaired and did Grappling Industries. It's not the first time I did Grappling Industries, but what I would like to say is, new thing I learned this week, I think I really like the Grappling Industries rule set. And essentially what it is it's an IBJJF rule set, but there's no advantages. Okay. And I really like that. I've had mixed thoughts when I bring this up to my friends about how I kind of wish there were no advantages, and they're like, why? And I'm like, I can't really tell you why. I think it's because when there's advantages on the line, we tend to fight for advantages a lot of the time, right? And it's hard to judge an advantage. If I'm in the closed guard and I get a nice deep cross collar grip on you, and then I just throw my hand over the top and put my wrist together, the ref might give me an advantage for that. And like, really, is it worth anything? I really like jiu-jitsu when there's no advantages. And I didn't really realize that until this weekend. Another thing that Grappling Industries is allowed, I know this is kind of sacrilegious, but they allow reaps in the gi, which I didn't really see too much of. I didn't get a chance to reap anyone in the gi, unfortunately. But they allow reaps in the gi, which is kind of funny. And one thing I really like is that the kids divisions, they have access to submissions like guillotines, katagatames, omoplatas, and triangles with the head pulled down. So a kid gets a triangle, they can start reefing on the head. I like that. I don't see why, we don't allow head and arm strangles or darces and things like that at the kids' levels. You could say, oh, the kids could hurt their neck. Yeah, it's true. I mean, kids can hurt their neck a lot of different ways in jiu-jitsu. And yeah, I think those moves should be allowed for kids. Kids are crying most of the time at tournaments anyways. So if the kid's crying because you pull down on their head, I mean, it's probably, you're always going to have kids crying at tournaments. So I really like that. And I think we should introduce those moves to kids at an earlier age. That's just my opinion. Another thing I like about Grappling Industries, you weigh in without the gi. I like that. I like how it's a round robin format, so you get a lot of fights. My only criticism of the Grappling Industries rule set is there's very short matches, so they're 5-minute matches. I only did get 3 submissions out of 9 matches, which I'm somewhat disappointed with, but I didn't get scored on at all, which is good. It is pretty hard to get submissions in a 5-minute match. I'm not going to lie, unless you catch someone. So the 3 divisions I did were I did the under 170 adult no-gi division. I did the absolute adult no-gi division. And then I did the absolute masters gi division. And that's just because I didn't have anyone in the absolute adult division. No, that's not true. There was 2 guys, and one of them was my student, and he's 230 pounds. And I fight him every day in the gym, and I'm not fighting him in competition because he'd beat the hell out of me. All right, what am I doing next? So last weekend was Grappling Industries Vancouver, and now this weekend is the Revolution in Washington. It's actually in Tacoma in Washington, USA, going south of the border to compete. I'm doing, again, no-gi adult middleweight, and I'm going to do gi masters middleweight. So I'm moving up a weight class to 180. And the reason why I wanted to hover a little bit heavier is because at the end of the month, I'm doing 80cc open in Ottawa, and I'm doing that at 170. So I'd like to come in a little bit heavier, and there's more fights at middleweight as well. So I'm hoping to be successful at that tournament. For those of you who don't know, the Revolution follows the IBJJF rule set, but they do not allow reaping and heel hooks, even at the black belt level in adult no-gi competition. Not really a big fan of that rule, but it'll kind of harken back to the IBJJF rule set a couple years ago before they added reaps and heel hooks. So that should be interesting. We're going to see how that happens. I'm hoping to do a little bit of wrestling to get ready for 80cc Ottawa. We'll see how it goes. I pulled guard in every match in Grappling Industries, and it worked like a charm. So, but for 80cc, you do need to wrestle at some point, and I probably should do some wrestling. So I'm looking forward to doing the Revolution this weekend, and then at the end of April, 80cc Ottawa. And then I'm going to Mexico for a couple of days for some R&R, so that'll be fun as well. So three tournaments in about a month, and I'm pretty happy about that. Let's see how successful I can be. Anyways, guys, that's the show. Lots of talks about Kimura. From mechanics to tactics to who was the legend Kimura himself. We also discussed dating a jiu-jitsu athlete and why you should do it and what is in my plans over the next couple weeks. Now, let's just talk about how you can interact with the show. You can message me on Instagram at The Essential Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. I don't have much content on there right now, but please send me a text, send me a DM if you have an idea for the show. If you have a quick thought you want me to discuss, I would love to take some good ideas and add them to the show. You can also email me at ejjpod, that's ejjpod@gmail.com. Also, how you can support the show anywhere you see it. Please like and share the show if you can on social media. You can follow us on Instagram at The Essential Jiu-Jitsu Podcast. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. If you've heard this episode, we're on YouTube. So please like and share and subscribe. Also, one of the biggest things that helps me as an entrepreneur is word of mouth. So if you like this episode, if you have gained from this at all, please tell the training partners at your gym about this show. let them know, hey, you know, the guy who's no longer on BJJ Mental Models? Well, he has his own show where all he does is talk about jiu-jitsu for an hour, and it's amazing. You should go check it out. Also, if you do want to support me, you can check out my online academy. It's the On Guard Online Academy at www.onguardbjj.com. That's ONGUARDBJJ.com. For $10 a month, you can have access to all of my instruction that I give every day in the gym. So every advanced class I teach, I document, and I put it on the academy. Plus, I summarize it. I leave for study links, and we work in monthly modules. So we're just about to wrap up leg lock month. Next month, probably going to be grappling for ADCC. That's the month we're going to do. We're going to tailor the whole month to the ADCC rule set just to get ready for ADCC Open Ottawa. And it's a good time. We got tons of stuff in there. If you want to learn how to referee, I have a course on that. If you want to check out what we teach our kids and what's required of our kids for every promotion, I have a section for kids. I have a fundamental section. I have all of my competition footage on there. Please check out my On Guard Online Academy. And of course, last but not least, I have a kids book. It's called Zara Can Do Jiu-Jitsu. It's about my daughter, Zara. She does jiu-jitsu, and jiu-jitsu is great for families and kids. This book is not just a corny jiu-jitsu book like some of the ones you see in bookstores. This one actually has a purpose. I shouldn't say that. All the other books are good too, but this one really follows my my daughter's ups and downs, the struggles of daily training in jiu-jitsu, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. Zara Can Do Jiu-Jitsu, great for the whole family. Please check out Zara Can Do Jiu-Jitsu. And that's about it. I'm going to leave some resources that you can check out, some links to some content at the bottom where you can see where I got some of these show notes from. But until next week, I'm not sure what we'll be talking about, but I know this. It will probably be everything you need to know about jiu-jitsu. Thanks, guys.